Hello, everyone. I'm Mizuki Takahashi. I'm the Executive Director and Chief Creator of the CHAT. I'm so excited. Finally, I have the Yee-Lann, although it is virtually, to make the conversations about her first solo show in Hong Kong until we hug again. So the exhibition starts from the hall. In this space, this time, so we installed 3 big mats. Which were woven by the proud Omadal, the communities, the sea weavers, with the colorful pandanas. The one bigger, the Tika emoji piece, we displayed on the platform and using at the stage to invite the different community groups to stage the performance every weekend.
Yeah, I love your public programming that you've been having with all the different groups coming in. It's been really lovely. That Tika emoji, one of the reasons we made it was so that some of the younger daughters of the weavers would also get involved. Some of these pictures are the pictures of the weavers, trying to include them physically in the exhibition and in various talks that we've had as well. Those are some of the names of the weavers that they've woven into the mat. That's the Keningau gang, that's Kak Julita and the weavers. I'm so glad that they're somehow there. Yeah, and also I don't weave. So I want to stress that it was through their collaboration with me that these works were able to be made. So to have their presence there and their faces is really important.
I also wanted to the 2 big mats flying over in the air, because this is also the first time for me to make the solo show without visiting the studio. Without visiting those who involved in making the exhibition. So I really wanted to fly over to the Sabah with the mat.
So Tana means land or earth, and I means water, or in this context, sea. The word is a compounded word together. Tana I means homeland. And the thing about Sabah's communities, why I'm working with a sea community and a land community, is that there has long been historic, even pre-colonial animosity between land peoples and sea peoples for many reasons. Much of the power came from the sea via the Brunei Sultanate or the Sulu Sultanate, who would toll rivers, who would raid land villages, things like that. And this was compounded and exaggerated during the colonial era, and is still an issue that's played up in like contemporary election time and things like that, especially as Sabah has a very, very large fluid border where people coming in. So we have a very large stateless and non-official migrant population. But I really wanted to stress, in order for Sabah to face contemporary issues, whether it's COVID or whether it's to face federal Malaysian power based in the Malay Peninsula, was that Sabah, orang tanah dan orang air, the people of the land and the people of the sea, must come together. So this was a basic principle in bringing the 2 communities together, to share a mat, to share each other's cultures and knowledges and storytelling, to come together and share that time together. This is the Pulau Omadal community, which is on the Sulu-Celebes Sea, border between the Sulu and Celebes Sea near Semporna. And Keningau is an inland district, quite an important district in Sabah, where a lot of our resistance to colonial forces really began in Keningau area district. Very important economically during the colonial period as well. The second mat in that space with the names on it, that's actually a 2-sided mat, but we couldn't show both sides. So the other side has sort of office tables, or tables that you might find in an office space, representing decision-making, contemporary tables, contemporary decision-making, as well as a couple of colonial tables. And they're woven onto this check pattern, which is a very, very common design found throughout the Southeast Asian maritime world. You can find in other textile arts, for example, in batik, stuff like that. And then I asked Kak Budi or Kak Rosia, who is my main collaborator, a field coordinator, if they would name the mat. And they named this mat Tepo Ania Nombonya, which in the Bajau Laut language means a mat with a number. That's a strange name. And then because the community is largely stateless, I just then realized, oh, it's because they don't have a number. And this was a very early mat that we made together. And it was because it's such significant size compared to what they're used to weaving, it became a really precious mat for them. And when you have a precious object, you give it a name for them to equate importance with having a number, precisely because they don't have a number. It is just about the weaving. It is also a lot more. It's about community. It's about histories. It's about contemporary commentary, all kinds of storytelling, heritage. All of this is embedded within their heritage weaves, whether it comes from the sea community on Pulau Omadal or the land community in the interior in Keningau. I think automatically working with communities and working with these mediums, the medium brings weight, the medium brings stories. I always like to say that it is highly linguistic and it's multi-generational and multilingual in that people can read cross-community motifs and things like that. We have written traditions in Southeast Asia, like the Batak of Sumatra, and they're usually the example given. But to me, we have a kind of written language throughout Southeast Asia via the textile arts, through things like motifs, which can be read. So it's a visual language. To me, it's also significant because it is largely made by women. So it's a kind of way of reading a female historic document or female lineage, if you like.
Yes.
And this mat was so much fun to make because it was a way of engaging 9-year-olds to play with their mums and 13-year-olds. So we had a lot of young weavers join us who sometimes go, oh, this is boring. They're not interested in learning weaving from their moms and all that. But then when it started entering into the language of their era, of the emoji and all that, they had so much fun. And this was woven in 2020 during the pandemic. So you will see the mask. At the background there, you'll see a figure. That is actually a Bajau diver. A lot of people globally will know about the Bajau because of their legendary ability to dive and be underwater for a long time. So they were completely responsible for choosing the emojis that they wanted to include in this mat. And they decided on all of it. So I was surprised to see that they included a diver. But the principle of the Tika emoji was also that we wanted to make a mat that people sat on or stood on or lay down on or had lunch on, you know. We did all those things. We slept on all of that. To me, they're about sharing architectural space, about sharing a platform with whoever comes to the mat. And then I just so love the chat programming because of all these people that you invited to the mat, to share the platform and the stage.
It's just that our community, running in a community teams invited so diverse groups, from the Hong Kong communities.
Every time we share these mats, to me, it feels like energy is put into it. And it just becomes more and more powerful. That's how I feel, because it calls people together. And to me, that's a very powerful force.
Okay, so that we are live in the chat floor. Yeah, in this case, we show your series of the artwork, so-called the Rasa Sayang, meaning feeling of the love, which you had made between the 2012 and the 2021. You just finished the last piece this year. Actually, so this piece inspired me a lot to give the exhibition title. We also have discussed throughout the lockdown period. We cannot travel each other. I cannot meet weavers. Many kind of social political issues we experience in both cities. So therefore, I gave this exhibition's titles until we had again.
Because of the pandemic, because we couldn't be together in the planning of this exhibition with the chat team and with you, and you couldn't come here and meet the weavers. I think I speak for you, but certainly for me, I had this certain longing to be close to the chat space, to you, to your team. There's a corniness to it. I think you'll agree. I think it's perfect in the sense that it is a longing. And also this question of who the we is, because there's so much animosity, there's political animosity, all kinds of animosities in the world. One of these chapters is quite an angry chapter, which is not actually hugging, but it's this one. It says, fuck that shit at the top. This set is actually my friend Alap and Yangzin. Both of them are in punk bands, but they're actually, and they're very close friends, they're actually wrestling with each other. But a wrestle, when you wrestle with someone, the shape that your arms make actually look like a hug. And if you look really closely at this particular chapter, you will find bleeding knuckles. Because I also work in the film industry, I have a lot of hair makeup friends. So they put on all this like scratches and bruises and fighting knuckles, bleeding knuckles. If you read on, it says, "Oi, you, would you like a cup of tea? For me, I would love a cup of tea. You and me and you and I and you and I, drinking tea, clouds part to share a moon." So this whole series really, I think, is summed up with this particular chapter of deep frustration in divides of people who are not listening to what the other person is saying. My desire for us to kind of, that we, and until we hug again, is that space that we take to share tea, share a mat, look at we share a moon, and kind of, it sounds so corny, but to emphasize humanity and a certain empathy between people. The blue and the orange were initially in 2012, which was like a million years ago now, representing opposing political forces in the Malaysian political landscape. But I never wanted it to be stuck in Malaysia, but that was an inspirational starting point for me. But they're complementary, they're opposite on the color wheel. So when you look at these works up close, the point where the orange and the blue meet can't sit still, because the retina of your eye can't cope with the blue and the orange opposite on the color wheel, fully saturated. So the line between the colors quivers just so slightly, and your eye tries to hold it still, but it won't. There's this frenetic energy. To me, is created in hugs, in wrestling, people banging up against people, you know.
I also can see the common thread is both in the mat and the rasa cyan piece, and also the other piece. So there is a lot of the element of the hope in your artworks as well. I think it's also the exhibition title, Until We Hug Again. The title itself represents the hope. You know, we don't know when we can hug each other. Yeah. Okay. So let's go inside the gallery finally. The exhibition starts your family photos. I also want to show some geographical relationship, Borneos and also the Sulu zone and etc.
Well, me looking for mats was triggered by exactly these photos. Second one from the left, I'm in that photo, my sister is being lifted, and my grandmother is by the door, and she used to weave these kinds of mats, these bundusan mats. So when I was looking at weaving, I couldn't even find the plant that she used to weave. And then I couldn't find someone who remembered how to treat the plant. I realized that even within my lifetime and within my family, knowledge was being lost. So it just triggered me even more. This is going back to 2017, triggered this motivation and need to explore what a mat is and the knowledge and the communities that come with it. Even in my grandmother, my family, it's not distant.
So then the visitors are invited to come inside the first large installations, looking through the rose-colored grasses. I wanted to have this piece, but you said later you didn't expect it. I want to.
I was surprised. I was really surprised.
Why did you surprise?
Because I was thinking about mats. But then when you said this, I went, oh, that makes so much sense, because I'm also talking about communities of people and shared architectural space. And the Picard Photo Studio was established 1959 in Malacca. These photos come from 1977 to 1982, a 5-year period. Just as Mahathir came to power in 82 is when I stopped with the negative collection I had. The earliest negatives from this studio were lost in a very bad flood. That's Mr. Tam, he's the photographer that took all these photographs. So I also wanted him to have his face. I like working collaboratively, but I didn't realize actually I've been doing it for a long time. This is a collaborative work as well, but why it fits with the show so much for me is that it brings community, it highlights communities of people sharing space, which is a lot about the sort of motivations and the sort of conceptual starting point for a lot of the work in this exhibition. If you look at the background in like this photo here that we're looking at, from the left to the right, all the backdrops will join up, and then you'll start to get a sense of what the physical photo studio must have looked like as one backdrop blends into another backdrop, into another backdrop. Familiarity of these photos that again emphasizes shared humanity, shared knowledge, shared memory. And it also, I'm really into that kind of mnemonic trigger, which you'll see later in the karaoke match, of how do you trigger somebody's mind, both in sentimental ways, but also when you, especially you put it here at the beginning of the exhibition, of how do you make people remember and bring kind of memory into the conversation as well. And I think that this space really helps trigger that. This is the mat where the women, on one side is the tables and the reverse is where so the tables of power is what we're looking at now. This is drone photography by my friend Andy Chow on the island. It's a bit hard to see. Oh, and then the reverse of the names that you see in the hall. This is Picturing Power, made in 2013. So this image, this to me is really, really important. It was a workshop that I did in 2013, organized by a photo historian called Alexander Supatono, who I think is now based in Edinburgh University. But he gathered a few of us in Jogja at Langeng Art Foundation, and we were looking at old colonial photographs, mainly from the Tropen Museum, to see how we might pull out readings from old photographs. And having looked at thousands of images, what really struck me was this table. It was the table of the colonial boss, of education, all kinds of tables in these images. So the first image there is the colonial whites, if you like, in their white clothing, entering a narrative here, not as an army of guns, but with an army of tables. This goes back to 2013. The idea of the table being an enabler of violence, or administration as being violent, a violence that is more brutal than death by gun, because it is inherited, it's learned violence. It's the way we have been taught to look at ourselves or our communities. It's the census. It's museums. What is valuable or not valuable for museums? It's borders. Our borders are created by colonial forces. And the Borneo states are very, very conscious of this, because our borders are totally accidental, assigned during the colonial period. So all of this inherited system of administrative violence, if you like, is really when the table came into my iconic motif language that I've used in subsequent series of work, and also on the mats. It's not all negative. It's also trying to find a seat at the table, to use some of those English language phrases, or how to maybe be at the table and then flip it, all this kind of language, which is really relevant to where I come from, and I think also relevant to many parts of the world, of how to be an active participant. Coming from Sabah, where we're really conscious of land, and the scale of the way we activate land, for a better word, changed during the colonial period to these massive monocrops. So one of the earliest monocrops was sugarcane, then rubber, which you would all know, and now oil palm, for instance. So when you have a monocrop that covers, the scale of land use changed dramatically during the colonial years. What happens when you have a monocrop? People will always talk about orangutans, environmental issues, but people very rarely talk about how a monocrop is like a blanket over land and how it covers the storytelling of that land, and how women are not so active with the land. So traditionally, for example, with paddy farming, women would plant the paddy, women would harvest the paddy, women would look after the spiritual well-being of paddy, they would sell it at the market. And then with the scale change and they're no longer working the land, they kind of lose their jobs. So, and also this idea of nenek moyang, of the inherited knowledge with this hair as a kind of way to describe DNA and that kind of knowledge.
After these pictures, finally, the indigenous people started to looking at themselves as the other through the lens brought from the Western.
Yes, the last two images of Picturing Power, you have a man here. This is actually a photograph not from Tropen Museum, but from American surveyors in the Sulu Sea region. A man looks into the theodolite as a land surveyor would have and described the land. But now he's looking at this woman, bare-breasted woman, wearing a sarong in this, whether it's a painting or a window, in this contemporary office space. To me, these two images talk about us now, about learning how we use tools of power and impose and subjugate others. The colonial period per se may be over, but there's other forms of coloniality, of people imposing and subjugating others through learned systems of power with a kind of learned toolbox of how do you colonize someone? How do you put someone down and lift yourself up? So these last two images are about that, ending with the office chair in contemporary times.
How do you choose the things to give a color in this picture?
I'm not interested in history for history's sake. I'm not reading history for history. I want to learn and I want to read history, but I'm not talking about history per se. I'm talking about now. And I'm using history as a methodology, if you like. People say, how do you go from photos to weaving? And I go, well, in a way, I am weaving here. I'm collecting snippets of, I think of it, you know that game Tetris? It's a very old game with all the bricks falling. And then when they fall into place, they make a picture. So in a way, I'm kind of weaving in a Tetris-like way of taking from all these different sources to create an image. But because I wanted to talk about contemporary times, to remind people to hint towards that. For example, you have a blue plastic stool, which clearly comes from contemporary times. It's just an indicator to break the historic essay, if you like.
Okay. Yes, it's finally we can see the Tika Mayors. It's a very important piece. It's your kind of early piece of the collaborations with the Sea community. I also say that it is my first time to make this circle, the shape gallery. I love the square shape, the white cube normally, but this time I decided to give the color to entire gallery space. I don't want to put these in kind of the very typical white cube. It's created from the Western modernism, aesthetics. So I think something is not right to do that. When I see all the pictures of the making these mats, your communities are making the mats, surrounded with the beautiful natures. That's also giving the energy, the aesthetic energy to the artworks as well. So I think I want to give the color to the artworks, so that we can see a lot of the desk and the table as well. And for the chat exhibition, we exhibit the 60 Tika Maya.
This was actually the first pieces that I worked with on the island, even prior to Tika Agaga, which is hanging at National Gallery Singapore, which was a commission that triggered a lot of this work. But these started as test pieces. It started in a really direct, straightforward way. The table that came with the colonial forces in Picturing Power, I wanted to juxtapose that against these mats. The Malay word meja, mesa in the Philippine Tagalog, come from the Spanish and Portuguese word mesa, meaning table. So to me, it is a very obvious linguistic direction to describe the table, that even the word that we have comes from the colonial powers from the region. The tika, which I call tika, is the Malay lingua franca shared throughout the island archipelagic Southeast Asia, has hundreds of different names. Every community has different names for the mat. And traditionally, Southeast Asia, we didn't have tables. Tables literally came in from elsewhere. All communities sat on the mat. The only time you see something table-esque is the rehal for the Quran that holds up the Quran, the pelamin that a sultan or orang besar may have sat on elevated off the ground, or dulang, an elevated tray for your bitunat. But basically, we didn't have tables. It was trying to begin with, it began as a juxtaposition of different kinds of knowledge and different kinds of power, a kind of patriarchal hard power with a feminist, more egalitarian power. But then I realized that I was being dictatorial in my behavior, and because I was giving the weavers silhouettes of tables to weave. A lot of these were like from the IKEA catalog, stuff like that. So then I realized that I wasn't acting like a mat. So then I asked them to, and the kids that were daughters of the weavers, if they would do a survey of the tables on the island. And then things started to shift and change. So it's got Rosia's kitchen table. Earlier I saw one of their tables, which is actually a stand for a politician. What do you call it when they put their speech on something like a
podium, yes.
Podium. So they, in their survey of the tables around them, they had one of those. They had a teacher's table, a student's table. And then it became really interesting about what the power of those tables meant to them. The storytelling and the exchanging became a lot richer once they were deciding on the tables that were to be included. It's a juxtaposition of different kinds of power that we encounter. A knowledge that I find that I can't let go of, that comes from somewhere else, that may defy logic at times. It's a storytelling of place and who you are, juxtaposed with another kind of power, which is this more official power. It's the power of the government civil servant, of the education system, informing you of what power is. So I just wanted to create, initially, it was just to see what would happen if we had this negotiation somehow between the plane of this stage or platform of the mat with this other instrument of power, or what to me has become an icon of power, and to juxtapose that and what it might trigger in your own mind, whether you recognize some of these tables and the kind of activities they may insinuate. So
let's go inside the Saku gallery finally. The lighting is very dark. It's because it's a fabric piece. It's a batik, so to protect the fabrics from the light. But also giving kind of, you're in the middle of the sea. I have to remind of the audience that the CHAT is the Center for Heritage Arts and Textile. So it's important to show how contemporary artists and design are playing on this material or subject matters, and to give the kind of freshness to see the textile.
Batik has got very, very strong meanings in Malaysia. I don't think we've got enough time to go into it too much. It was really important to me to use batik for the medium itself. This is called the Orang Besar series. It's looking at power. It's looking at the Orang Besar, the big man. In one of the images, you'll see all the figures holding up someone, and then it's a reciprocal relationship of power. So the big man under the umbrella, because we always see him under the umbrella in historic images, etchings and whatnot, he's always held up. But in the reciprocal image, he has to also hold up people. So it's talking about the structures of the body politic of power, with an element from the environment describing nature, if you like. Okay, this is Kain Panjang series. Kain Panjang is like a kain sarong, but longer. The shape of the cloth, the length of the cloth, and the way it is worn differentiates it from the kain sarong. It's longer. It's worn tighter, meaning that you can't work the land wearing a kain panjang. You work the land wearing a kain sarong. The meanings within the cloth. Also, I wanted to use a female medium. Historically, women were the batik makers. And I wanted that element to come in to describe this very patriarchal male world.
I'm very, very impressed that you also taking the wax resist of the batik, so taking the literally like resist, the female resist.
I really love Batik Crackle for its conceptual readings of wax and resist, of what you allow to be dyed and what you resist against dye. So that these are islands of cloth. The way cloth is so much part of our history of trade, history of ideas, and how Batik Crackle and osmosis of language, of ideas, happen so much through this medium. And this is called Orang Besar series, Empires of Privateers and Their Glorious Ventures. It's me being a bit naughty also, talking about not so much the opposite of a pirate is a privateer, because they're like Francis Drake was a privateer for the British Crown. So are some of these towers or empires are private, like in Sabah, they're privateers raiding land villages for the sea sultans. And it's about contemporary times. It's about the tender process, who gets the tender. It's about corruption, all of this.
Is there any symbolic meaning of the umbrella here?
One of the minions would have been holding an umbrella over the boss, honoring the boss or uplifting their boss, their big man. But that big man, the Orang Besar, is expected in a reciprocal relationship to also take care of and be responsible for the well-being of the people that uplift him. So it's this reciprocal relationship between people and economic and social well-being structures. Just trying to understand why our political landscape has these overtones of how it works basically within this sort of very patriarchal way of addressing and having closeness to power. To be responsible for someone to be responsible for you.
Yeah, in thinking about the entire exhibition floor and the structures, I instinctively decided to put this Orang Besar in the center of the exhibitions, because I could see all kind of, this works to show all your concerns, and also your criticality, also the keen insights of the material and the technique. I could see is that this work is showing the way of narrating the colonial past, and also the critical commentary on the patriarchy system that's ongoing the system, but also that you kind of make the female, quiet power and the technique, and also the skill, kind of giving the spotlight quietly. And but this work is nevertheless talking about patriarchal systems. So then I want to patch the wounds or problems created by this patriarchal powers. That I want to patch with the mats. Then the outside of this Orang Besar rooms, that actually I can see that is how you and your weavers or collaborators trying to overcome the problem which the patriarchal system has created. So that was kind of my interpretation.
It's also wanting to locate us in this region through the materiality that you've just described, and to continue the storytelling. The fact that these objects historically were largely made by women is significant. If you look for the woman's voice throughout Southeast Asia, it's hard to find the historic voice. So if you look through the objects of the batik cloth or the woven items across the textile arts of the region, that's where you'll find a voice and object. Yeah.
And this space is the Seven Hats and the Punkies. It's another your collaboration with the performers and the choreographers in Sabah. It's very, very popular piece. This is also, I can see the common critical commentaries I can find in the Orang Besar.
This is a very male work. I think of this as having an anxiety though. A singular hat is a traditional heritage hat from the Murut people from inland Sabah, who are very, very associated with the jungle. So it's normally the spire is only a few inches high. So one hat with 5 short spires. Each spire actually represents the jungle, is a tree. And these are normally worn by Morot men. And then it's usually you don't actually see the hat. Base of the hat is covered with other textiles, beads, shells, all kinds of things. And then they'll have the Argus bird feathers, called Lalandau feathers, sticking up from the trees. They're worn by Morot men, known to be warriors and jungle people who forage for the jungle for items for trade or for use. But what I've done is I've extended the 5 tree spires into this interconnected, interreliant, rhizomic root structure or canopy to talk not just about our deep familiarity with the jungle via the Morot man, but a more global interconnectedness as well. There's a tail on this hat that goes off, insinuating that it can continue to another group of hats. And then these male dancers, 7 of them are from the Tagap dance theater in Sabah, in Kota Kinabalu. They're a wonderful group. The choreographer that I was working with on this, his name is Azizan. He was really instrumental in how the hat and these bodies moved. Because it is very restrictive with this hat, but I thought they were incredible. The name of this is Pankis, which is the name of a very familiar sound to us, which is a war cry, and also a cry that is often used by, like, my grandmother's people, the Kadazan people, the Doson people, the Morot people. There's all slight variations, but it's a war cry and a cry when you begin a dance or when you start a ritual, and it's a calling cry. In the middle of this loop of this video, there's the sound of a gong. Again, another thing that calls you together. And it's this thing that's embedded in my knowledge of Sabah, is the sound of this war cry. This work pulls in all of that. And to me, what I like about our dancers here is that they're not taking that bombastic Borneo warrior stance, but they're taking one that is much more filled with anxiety, talking about all these concerns, whether it be climate change or identity politics or community or just who you are within these contemporary times with the male body. And I wanted the male body in an exhibition that's so female on other levels.
Okay, I'm so proud of having this Canton Pop karaoke mats. Yeah. And the juxtaposing with the UK, the American song, the karaoke mats.
Why karaoke mats? Because I travel so much in Sabah, right, between these communities, and everywhere you go in Sabah, you hear somebody singing karaoke. But what I wanted to do was to provide an oral soundtrack reflective of that experience. And again, it's this mnemonic device. So when you see the words and you start reading it, very quickly you realize that those words are song lyrics. And the minute you recognize the song lyrics, you can't help it, but you start singing it in your head. And when you sing it in your head, you're providing a musical soundtrack. Isn't it amazing weaving? It's amazing because the weavers don't read, write, or have any familiarity with Chinese characters. I'm so proud of them. They did an incredible job. It's incredible weaving. This is a strange work to experience standing in front of it, because if you're front on, you can't see anything. And you have to kind of find the image. That's why this photograph is to the side of it. If you stand front on, there's nothing there. You just see bamboo, right? So you kind of got to find the image. And this bamboo is incredible. It's woven on like an X-axis, the weft and the warp. And it has a lenticular effect. So as you walk from left to right in front of it, what appears light will appear dark, and what appears dark will appear light, kind of like Thai silk or shot silk. So I was trying to create architectural 3-dimensional kind of floating space, if you like. See, front on, you can't really see very much. But if you look at a white part, as it moves, it becomes dark. So it has a very strange effect. The louver window is inspired by the louver window over my bed, same window since I was 5 years old. And I've been coming home, right? So I've been refamiliarizing myself with things. Also architecturally, there's a mat at the bottom that's like a portal, if you like. And we actually invented that background weave, which we called Mansao Ansao. In the next gallery, there's a work that's dedicated to that Mansao Ansao. My cheeky self is called Three Hovering Louvres because with a capital L, because I was in my cheeky way referring to the Louvre Museum in Paris. Weaving arts, textile arts are depositories of so much knowledge. So it's my private joke lah.
Then we can move to the next gallery.
And that's called Nantuapan. This is a traditional motif, 4 people meeting at a rice jar. The colorful lines are like worms. I call them gyuk, reference to something that my grandmother used to always. It's these things that disturb my memory, like these dancing worms that are like from my grandma. It's a night sky, it's a dreamtime space with the Mansao Ansao, this weave that we invented that is not a repeat or a tessellated pattern, but it changes, it's never repeated. And Mansao Ansao in Dusun and Murut means to journey without knowing where you're going, to journey without knowing where you're headed. This again is architectural space. I wanted to try and create 3-dimensional space using a mat. It's a billboard also to embedded within here, Pinungu Murut design, which is a design to talk about hills without end. So it's a landscape, but it's a tessellated pattern with 2 types of flowers. But it also refers to these old memories and contemporary times of finding a balance between the two with these worms from my grandmother.
Yeah, but I also think that this, the bamboo weave, kind of the challenge to the painting, the discourse. It's dominated by the Western idea of the fine arts or the modernism ideas. History of paintings, they pursue to realize 3-dimensional space onto the 2-dimensional, canvas or 2-dimensional space. I
was very much bringing that contemporary art language, trying to these mats to see whether we could, to see what would happen if we mix those languages, just as we mix the motifs, and just as we mix our knowledge of that we have coming from this part of the world. So I wanted to try and visualize and experiment with that kind of language as well. This,
Ramon, is also a very important piece woven by the proud Omado communities. And it's almost like the codex or visual dictionaries, because they move the old traditional patterns there.
It's counting patterns it's kind of like the basis for the mats, counting rhythms, different designs which come from counting rhythms. So it acts as a kind of collection of those, a dictionary or an index, these patterns.
The hearing what you say, that it also sounds like the score, because it's related to rhythm. Yeah, then this ribbons is actually used in the other works, the video works.
These are called Depo mats. These are their heritage weaves. That's got Rosia, one of my main weavers. That's what the ribbon looks like in its rolled form. And that's got Sana. She's one of the weavers that remembers a lot of the patterns. What they're doing is stretching the ribbon across the sea. So they're walking the ribbon across the sea so that the ribbon becomes like a bridge between the landed Malaysian community and the more nomadic seafaring Bajau Sama de Laut community across the water. The sea here is not so deep. It goes to about chest height at high tide, and then the sand is exposed during low tide. So they're walking to Kak Budi's house, and Kak Budi is one of the weavers in our team as well. But what happens is that action of walking the ribbon across the waterway makes a bridge that is based on heritage, culture, counting patterns, rhythm, old knowledge, across notions of the hard power, the patriarchal border, all these kinds of things. So within it, there's these embedded notions also of power, of community, knowledge.
So what we show in the gallery. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoy this virtual tours with our conversations.